Okay, Hanukkah is basically over. So we're going to go back to where we were before Hanukkah. We were learning, then we learned the introduction to the laws of Shabbos. So what we're going to do now for a while is go through various halachos of Shabbos, things that are forbidden to do on Shabbos. We already gave an introduction, what is biblically forbidden, what is rabbinically forbidden. But basically, in order for something to be biblically forbidden, it has to be done in the Mishkan, number one. It has to be constructive. It has to be what's called niskayim. It cannot be, it doesn't have to last forever, but it's not something that just disappears. It has to be a minimal type of permanency. It has to be done the normal way of doing it. All those things that we learned. So the malach we're going to talk about today is what's called kaisiv, writing. Now, where did they write in the Mishkan? It was interesting. The boards of the Mishkan that they took apart and then put back together when they traveled, when they camped. So the din was the boards had to be the same boards next to each other. So how did they know which boards, the sequence of the boards? Okay, how did they label them? So they wrote, like on one board, let's say the first board, they would write Aleph, first board, and one side they would write Aleph, Aleph, and then on the other side of the board on top, they would write Aleph Bais. Side one, side two. Then next to it, they would put Bais Aleph, and then Bais Bais, and then Gimel Aleph. So you used to write on the boards of the Mishkan. So therefore, in the construction of the Mishkan, writing was done. So therefore, the malacha of writing is biblically forbidden. Now, the writing, by the way, can be in any language, doesn't have to be Hebrew, in any language, or for that matter, any symbol in any language. You can make a check, a mark, whatever it is considered writing. I'll give you an example. They bring down, sometimes people would make a mark when they were reading a book, and when they finished the book, where they finished, they made like a pen mark. Just a dot, they should know that's where they're up to. That would also be a mark, a letter on Shabbos. There's no size to the letter. So that would be biblically forbidden on Shabbos, okay?
You're saying they mark these walls on Shabbos?
No, but they did it in the construction of the Mishkan, and therefore we're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. Now, the method of writing could be any instrument that writes. It could be pen, pencil, chalk, rubber stamp, typewriter, computer, even with a finger, like finger painting or whatever. It's not only writing. You draw a picture, you make a design, whatever. All those things are considered writing forbidden on Shabbos. Even if you don't write with ink, it's still forbidden to do on Shabbos. For instance, you can't mold letters out of clay. Or you can't mold a shape on Shabbos with clay. So let's say Play-Doh, right? The kids play with Play-Doh. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to play with Play-Doh. I'm not talking about babies. They take it, they play with it. But an adult wouldn't be able to give them the Play-Doh on Shabbos to play with. Because it's made to mold shapes, or letters, or whatever it is, and then you take it apart. Or this, what's it called? Etch and sketch, whatever, that the kids play, they make it, and then they erase it, and then even though it's temporary, it's still rabbinically forbidden. Again, permanent, and there's a whole discussion in the poskim, what is considered permanent? How long is permanent? So some poskim want to say if it lasts that Shabbos, it's called permanent. It doesn't have to last for a year. Okay, sometimes you can make a mark. Obviously, I'll give you an example. A pen mark will last longer than a pencil mark. A pencil mark will last longer than a chalk mark. But you write with chalk, and it's going to last over Shabbos, so that's called permanent. Even though eventually it will disappear. Or, for instance, if you write on your skin. You write on your skin, let's say, people write phone numbers on their hand when they don't have paper around. I've seen it done by a lot of people. They write numbers or whatever it is. So then the din is, even though eventually the oil of the skin is going to erase it, but it's still lasting a day. It's called permanent writing. It's biblical writing, which would be biblically, again, Again, if you did it intentionally and you were warned, you get stoned. If you did it intentionally, you weren't warned, you get kardus. So I'm saying all these things you have to have in mind.
But the extra sketch that you brought up, Rabbi, which is interesting, it disappears in a second. You move the item, the toy.
And ochanami, but still temporary, and temporary is rabbinically forbidden. If it would be permanent, it would be biblically forbidden. Rabbinically, even we discussing by other din in the introduction, like what happens if you write on a dirty car. You write, people are wash me or whatever, or on a window in California, we don't know, like in New York, you have fogged up windows, and then you write, it doesn't last long, so it's not biblically forbidden, obviously. You're writing with your hand, with your finger, and no ink, and there's nothing there, and it's eventually going to erase.
Or fogged up window, if you make a mark, it's not permissible.
Right. It would be rabbinically forbidden. 1 second. The same thing applies, by the way, of taking pictures, developing. Well, years ago when they developed pictures with, but today even digital pictures are still mamish writing, and technically that's probably it's permanent until you erase it. It will be there. So you have to keep all these things in mind. Another interesting thing that a lot of people are unaware of: what happens if you can't, writing is not only with writing. Let's say if you take, many people do this. A guy used to do it in the show, I stopped him as soon as I saw it. Sometimes you make a tuna salad for shalosh shudas, yeah? You want to make a little fancier. So you'll make it into a shape of a fish. Because tuna fish, you'll make it into a shape of a fish. So what are you doing? I'm just taking it and forming a shape of a fish. That's called writing. It's called writing. You're creating a picture of a fish. A picture is writing in Shabbos. So all these things, you have to keep in mind, they're all not allowed to do. What?
Would it be people that make fruit platters sometimes want to make it in the shape of...
So the halacha is, if you make, let's say, just squares or circles, that's not a shape of any particular... You cut a watermelon into squares. That's not called a shape. We're talking a meaningful shape. If you want to, I'll give you another example. It might not be writing, but it's all forbidden. Sometimes people want to make watermelon, yeah? So they make watermelon balls with a scooper, and then they cut the watermelon in such a way that you have a half a watermelon that's open, and then they make it's a basket out of the watermelon itself, right? So you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. So people that plan parties or have fruit platters and things, they have to know that certain things you just can't do on Shabbos. You have to do it before Shabbos.
Are you allowed to fill in a basket that was made before Shabbos with the cut fruit?
Yeah, that you're not doing anything. You're just filling up. It's like, what's the difference than a glass or a plate? But I'm saying you can't create the form and the shape of any design whatsoever.
Did a guy do it?
No, if you're not allowed to do it, a guy can't do it either.
They serve that tuna salad. They decide to make it in the shape of a fish.
If you see him, you have to stop him. If you see him doing it, you have to stop him. There's a lot of things like this. Now, writing could also be forbidden. B'chlal, I want to tell you something. A mashgiach of a caterer on Shabbos has to be a person that knows Hilchah Shabbos. Because the caterers inevitably do a lot of things that could be either biblical Chilul Shabbos, rabbinic Chilul Shabbos. Anybody that knows what goes on with the caterers, what they do, and they're reheating, and they're cooking, and they're this, and on Shabbos, they're designing. The mashgiach has to know, he has to even know what's a question to ask, what's allowed and not allowed.
They might not even be there on Shabbos.
Huh?
They might not be in Shabbos and they're doing something.
The mashgiach has to be there on Shabbos. So somebody, even if they bring the food before Shabbos, yeah? But if you're setting it up, so you need to have somebody there that knows what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. What you're allowed to put into a warmer, you're allowed to put things into a warmer on Shabbos, not allowed to put things in a warmer on Shabbos. There's tons of dinim that a mashgiach in kashrus, even during the week, a mashgiach in kashrus has to really know what they're doing. You can't have a yokel be a mashgiach because you're going to end up with treifa functions, mamish treifa functions.
What temperature can you go up to in a warmer?
What?
What temperature can you go up to in a warmer, like Fahrenheit, but there's liquid involved?
To do what? Leave something in there or put something in? You're not allowed to put anything in a warmer on Shabbos.
But some people do.
Some people drive on Shabbos too.
From people.
What do you mean from people? What do you mean? What is the definition of a from person? Maybe it's a din of chazara or hatmana. Oh. So now you're talking, see? Now you're talking about putting challah on top of a tray, on top of a blech. Yeah, that's allowed. But to put challah into a warmer on Shabbos is not allowed. So again, you can't, what?
Even if the warmer is less than 110 degrees?
That's a machlekes in poskim. 110 degree, even if it's under Yatzel letters by many poskim, you're not allowed to.
What about a food that is no liquid?
Okay, we're not learning Bishul now. Now we're learning writing. What? Hello?
On a window that has condensation,
Yeah.
that's not liquid, that's not.
So it's midrabanan asr. I'm saying it's biblical if it's miskayim. If it's not permanent, then it's now the amount of writing to be biblically forbidden is 2 letters or 2 marks. Okay? Somebody writes, and this we talked about in the introduction. If somebody writes 1 mark, so it's what's called chotzi shiur. They did the whole malacha but half the amount, so it's still biblically forbidden, but you don't get punished for it. You don't get chatos, no skila, no kodesh, but it's still biblically forbidden. So sometimes you can have a case that you could write by not writing. In other words, you can erase a letter, and by erasing a letter, you're making a letter. I can give you a few examples of that. Let's say you have, we mentioned this when we were learning the introduction. You have the letter ches, okay? Now ches, different ways of writing ches, different customs. But it could be a vav and a zayin. Okay, now it's a vav and a zayin with a little crown on top that connects it. Right, so it looks like 1 letter, now it's a ches. So nital gagal shel ches, the Gemara says, what happens if somebody takes off the crown of the ches? They erase it. So they didn't write 2 letters, but now they did write 2 letters because now you created a vav and a zayin that weren't there before. So granted, before it was a ches, and all you're doing is erasing the top of the ches. But the bottom line is, now you created 2 letters. You created 2 letters. It's called mamash chiyav and Shabbat. What?
A game like Scrabble where you're making words.
We'll talk about Scrabble when we get there. It depends. What?
How about if someone asks you direction and they Google it?
You can't Google on Shabbos.
No, someone else. They ask you direction and you tell them what is it and they Google it.
Yeah. You should tell them don't go. If they're Googling it, why do they need you?
No, someone else. They don't know.
A Jew or a goy, doesn't matter?
A Jew asks you directions? Or?
No.
It's a whole different din. This happens a lot, not anymore because now everybody has Google Maps or Waze. But years ago, you'd be walking in the street. How many times do people stop the car? Okay, nobody does it today, but people stop the car and ask you for directions. Right? Now, halachically, if it's a guy, you can give him directions because a guy is allowed to drive on Shabbos. If it's a Jew, then it's an issue.
So you can tell him get lost.
Tell him get lost. You tell him to get out of the car and stop driving. What?
But if you don't give directions, he'll end up driving more, he gets lost.
So?
You're not telling him to drive, just telling him where it is.
But in writing and Google it, that's what
It's Messiah Lidei Aver for sure. It's probably Lifnei Iver also. Messiah Lidei Aver for sure. Lifnei Iver very possible. Okay. So you can, or I'll give you another example. What happens if you have a letter ches, right? Now ches looks like a hey, except By the ches, the third foot is connected, and the hey is a space. What happened if you erase that little space? So now from the ches it became a hey. So now you wrote a hey. So it's only one letter, but it's still biblically forbidden because it's you wrote a letter. So it doesn't mean that's what. Whatever. If it looks like two letters, then it's going to be two letters. Therefore, I mean, okay, we'll talk about this tomorrow. Therefore, you have sometimes when a person has to write, they should write with the different hand than they normally write with. Okay, we'll get.